Now, there's something else the administration continues to crack down on, and that is immigration. The most recent example, halting all cases of immigration from 19 countries deemed to be a high risk of producing national security threats, a list that could reportedly expand to 30 nations or more. So what's that mean? It boils down to a hold on green card and citizenship applications pending a comprehensive review. Secretary of State Marco Rubio explained why this move isn't just prudent, it's necessary.
They are susceptible to radicalization once they enter the United States because they don't assimilate well, because they fall victim to some of this online propaganda and efforts to radicalize people. And 2 or 3 years later, you find that they have radicalized. That is a threat. That is a real threat. It is a threat for everyone. We have homegrown people in the United States born here that have been radicalized. But I do think it is a higher threat among people that come from cultures and backgrounds that make it harder for them to assimilate once they get into the United States, and that make them vulnerable to Arabic language, for example, propaganda by ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any of these other groups that are looking to radicalize people.
There's a particularly horrifying example of what the Secretary is talking about right there when it comes to assimilation. Now, this escaped my attention last spring, but it's resurfaced, and I think it's something that you should see. It's body cam footage from April. It shows a police officer doing a routine traffic stop. The suspect, though, in the traffic stop is an armed man who worked as a translator for the United States Special Forces in Afghanistan. And he came to the United States then in 2014. The traffic stop escalated. It eventually led to a deadly shootout. The officers were shot, but they survived. But you need to hear what the suspect said before he died, what he said about living in America.
I have a gun and I'm armed. I don't have a driving license.
Why not?
Go back, sit in the car and leave. You people brought me to this country and I'm dying every single day, and I have 4 children. I can't get a job, I can't get a disability, and they took my license because I'm not able to pay the insurance. So why are you trying to kill me?
I don't give a damn.
I don't give a damn. I should have served with Taliban.
I die every single damn day. I should have served with the Taliban. Tell me that doesn't say something about assimilation into America. Joining me now is the host of the Relatable podcast, Allie Beth Stuckey. Allie, it's great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You know, in some ways, while not having sympathy, I think we can all have some understanding, at least on an analytical basis, of how some man could be jerked out of, quite honestly, a primitive culture somewhere in Afghanistan, dropped into, in this case, Fairfax, Virginia, a hyper-connected, hyper-modern world, and he's expected to light speed jump into the 21st century.
Right.
And what would he do but revert to the things that he knows so well, and some of those things might be radical Islam.
And we can have compassion for that individual and the plight of all kinds of people and still understand that we as a nation have a responsibility. Our government has a God-given responsibility to put the interests and the security and the well-being of our people first. It is not possible for them to prioritize the safety and desires and the economic prosperity of every single person from every single country. And so, yes, we can say, I want the best for that person, but I don't want the best for that person here because I care about my neighbors. I care about my children. I care about the place that God has providentially placed me, and I want to put that first.
Yeah, and the effort of understanding is not to obviously excuse any type of violent behavior, but it is to for us as a nation to step back and ask if these experiments can be successful. Successful not just on the average, but on the whole, because we can't afford the exceptions. And now we have an entire country. 16% of the current population of America is foreign-born. We're not just talking about Afghans. We're talking about Somalis. We're talking about Central Americans. We're asking a lot of people to assimilate into America, when the question should be, should they be here assimilating in the first place in America?
Right. And your point that you just made is so important, that we cannot afford the exceptions. It's not that every person who was born somewhere else is going to be a criminal, or maybe even more likely to be a criminal. It's that we already have criminals here, and we don't need to add more of those. Every single crime that's committed by someone who should not be here in the first place was preventable. Not every crime is preventable, but those are. And so if we want a safer nation, if we want a more prosperous nation, we have to be asking these uncomfortable questions that, honestly, I hope and I think that more people are getting more comfortable asking.
They should. because it's about who we are, the future of America. I thought Mark Krikorian, who's at the Center for Immigration Studies, put this very well, Ali. He wrote, the idea basically here is that there is no meaning to nationhood, or that the peoplehood, that living in the United States is kind of like living in northern Jersey versus southern Jersey. You live in the United States, or you live in Mexico, or you live in Swaziland, it doesn't mean anything. The left, increasingly, even at the mainstream level, they see immigration law itself as a kind of Jim Crow, that it's immoral to keep anyone from moving to the United States if they want to, and everything that stems from that. Because if that's your worldview, then obviously law enforcement coming around to round up and remove people who have no right to be here, no legal right to be here, would be immoral. He's articulating the point of view of the left, and he points out it's increasingly the view in broad swaths of America. So, by the way, if you are an immigrant that comes into America, what are you assimilating into? Half the country denies there's something even to acknowledge when it comes to America.
It's a really good point. It seems like the majority opinion, certainly on the left, is that everyone gets a national identity, that that's good, that it should be celebrated, that everyone's culture from around the world is something that is beneficial. Except for Americans, that we shouldn't talk about having a national identity, that somehow that's fascism or Christian nationalism, to say, no, we're actually not just an idea. We are a people, we are a nation, and we, just like every other country, have the right and responsibility to put our interests first. That is how we create a nation that flourishes and with order.
Exactly. Indeed, it's even about our survivability.
Yes.
Will we continue as a nation? Ali Bestaki, always really good. Check her stuff out at the Relatable Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ali.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.